Ignore that.
Ignore
and
the
look here.
iPad.
Okay. We
I
can
just want to see real quickly, yeah. All right, you guys can start whenever you want. We just have to remember that the microphone's going to pick up everything, so,
We can't talk.
right.
No talking.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual presentation. I am Dr. DeSalvo, the assistant principal who oversees the English department.
And I'm Ms. Catherine Benzinger, the English Department Chair at Woodson High School. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge a few key individuals who have made today's program possible. We would like to thank our student-based technology specialist, Mrs. Brown, for providing technical support and setup for today's event. We would like to thank our English 10 teachers in the 10th grade for their respectful discussions regarding the Holocaust and night. We would like to thank Dr. Floyd and Mrs. Fargenstein for their support and coordination in bringing this presentation to you today. And of course, to our distinguished guest and her daughter, Ms. Weiss, for accepting our invitation once again to come and speak with us today. Too often, words in our textbooks become mere letters on a page, detailing events which sometimes seem far removed from our daily lives. Too often, we become detached from the stories told because events of the past are so complex that printed words cannot truly capture their significance. Too often, for those who did not experience it, history seems to embody a time far removed from our own because we lack a tangible link to the past. Today, we have a direct connection to history.
W.T. Woodson is honored to host Miss Irene Weiss, a local survivor of Auschwitz with personal ties to our Cavalier community. Hailing from a Hungarian-speaking part of Eastern Europe, which is now part of the Ukraine, Miss Weiss arrived in the United States in 1947 at the age of 16. In 1949, she married her husband, Martin Weiss, in New York City before moving to Northern Virginia in 1953, where she raised 3 children who went on to attend Woodson and don the iconic blue and white. After receiving a BA in education from American University, she worked as an English as second language teacher for many years in Fairfax County Public Schools. During the early part of her life, Ms. Weiss was a tragic participant in the Holocaust and experienced firsthand the darker depths of humanity. A prominent speaker on the war era, she now informs the public of the past through her presentations at the United States Holocaust Museum, as well as at local high schools and colleges. Delivering a message you, our future generation, must hear and learn from. She is here to share with you her first-person account of this tragic time in history, an event which not only resulted in an extreme loss of life, but for her personally, 22 members of her extended family. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you Miss Irene Weiss.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I was a witness to something that needs to be remembered. I'm going to talk to you about a tragic period of history that I lived through and can talk about it firsthand. Even though I'm 90 years old, what happened to me is still very vivid in my memory. I was 13 years old when these events happened during World War II. Nazi Germany started the war and wanted to transform the world into superior and inferior people. They considered themselves the master race. The inferior people were other ethnic and racial groups, and one of their main targets were the Jews, who had lived peacefully for centuries in Europe. By 1944, most of the Jews of Europe had been murdered. The Nazis were determined to finish the extermination of the Jews in Europe. They turned their attention to the 500,000 Jews in Hungary. At that time, I was living in a small town in Hungary with my parents, 5 siblings, and a large extended family. In the spring of 1944, Hungarian local officials announced that the Jews of my town had 24 hours to leave their homes with 1 suitcase each and assemble at the town hall. A delegation made up of the mayor, police chief, and my school principal arrived at the door, demanding that we hand over money and valuables. Along with other Jews in our town, we were taken to an abandoned brick factory some miles away. There we joined hundreds of Jewish families from neighboring towns. We were kept there for about 1 month, sleeping on the crowded floor of the factory. Our food from home was soon gone, and we were dependent on a soup ration. A few weeks later, a freight train arrived on the tracks alongside the factory. Loudspeakers announced that everyone must get into the train. No one told us our destination. Flanked by guards, my family struggled to stay together. We managed to get into the same cattle car along with some 80 to 100 people. A guard slammed the door shut and bolted it from the outside. Instantly it was dark. The only air and light came from a small window in the upper corner. Hours later, the train began to move. There was a bucket for the toilet in the middle of the car. Hours passed, a night and a day. The bucket filled up. Peering out the window, my father confirmed our worst fear. The train was crossing into Poland. We had heard rumors of mass shooting of Jewish families in the forests of Nazi-occupied Poland. We had never heard of Auschwitz. Finally, the train stopped. There are barracks here, my father said. This must be a work camp. We were relieved that we were not going to be shot in the forest of Poland. The doors opened and air and light rushed in. There were dogs, guards with guns, and prisoners in striped uniforms. "Leave everything behind," they shouted. "Get out." My mother quickly unpacked extra clothing and told us to put on some more layers. My head was covered with a kerchief, and I put on an oversized winter coat. On the platform, my family reached for one another, urgently trying to stay together in the crush of people, noise, and confusion. SS guards with guns moved the huge crowd forward up the platform. An SS guard shouted, men to one side, women and children to the other. In an instant, my father and 16-year-old brother were lined up in a huge column off to one side. I never saw them again. My mother, sisters, younger brothers, and I were in another large column of women and children. Smoke billowed from a chimney in the distance. The column edged forward, and when we reached the front of the line, a dozen or more armed Nazi guards blocked our way. One held a small stick. The guard with a stick motioned my 17-year-old sister Serena to one side, and she disappeared down a road. In the next moment, he motioned my mother and my 2 little brothers to the other side, and they also disappeared from view. Only my younger sister Edith and I remained. The stick came down between us. Edith was sent in the direction that my mother went. The guard looked at me and hesitated an instant. Although I was only 13 years old and should have been selected with the children, my kerchief on my head and the big coat made me look older. He motioned me to go in the direction that Serena and other young adults went, and turned his attention to the women and children lined up behind me. I tried to see if my little sister had caught up to our mother. It was not possible for me to see what happened to her in the fast-moving crowd. Our family had tried so hard to stay together. We were now completely torn apart. The trauma of this separation lingers with me to this day. Serena and I were herded into a bathhouse where we were shaved, disinfected, and handed prison clothes. We were moved to a barrack with about 200 women. We still didn't know where we were. We asked the other prisoners, when will we see our families? A woman pointed to a chimney and said, "Do you see the smoke? There is your family." Now, I thought, why should anyone say such things to us? By sheer luck, we discovered my mother's two sisters, who were in their 20s, in a nearby barrack. Their loving devotion helped to protect and shield us in this terrifying place. In the following days, we were tattooed and sent to work near crematorium number 4 at a storage and processing area. There, we sorted through mountains of clothing, shoes, eyeglasses, toothbrushes, baby carriages, every kind of household item brought by the people arriving on the transports, and also belongings of people coming out of the gas chambers. Because we worked and lived next to the gas chambers and crematorium, we had first-hand knowledge of what had happened to our families. Day and night, columns of young mothers with children and elderly passed by our barrack. We watched them enter the gate that led to the gas chambers. Sometimes they called out questions, but by that point, nothing could save them. The trucks kept bringing more and more from the platform and the crematorium, and the piles never became smaller. We continued to sort them to get them ready to be sent to Germany for the use of the German population. The sounds were magnified when we worked outside at night. First, I would hear the whistle of the train and the hissing of the steam engine arriving on the platform. The people coming from the train at night saw the smoke and flames belching from the chimneys and even burning of bodies in open pits. It looked to them like they were being herded into the open flames. I plugged my ears with my fingers to block out their shrieks and their prayers. And then there was silence. In the distance, I would hear the whistle of another train arriving. In January 1945, as the Russian army approached Auschwitz, we were forced on a death march along with thousands of other prisoners, miles, hundreds of miles from Auschwitz into Germany. Anyone who fell from exhaustion or sat down to rest was shot. By the time we reached other camps in Germany, we were sick and emaciated. One of my aunts came down with typhus and was selected to be killed. My other aunt was also very sick. Soon after, my sister Serena was also selected to be killed. When I realized that we were about to be separated, I said, "I'm her sister." I was told, "You can go too." So we were put in a room with other selected women, awaiting a truck that would take us to be killed. Perhaps because of the approaching Russian front and the resulting chaos, the truck didn't come that day. Soon after, the guards fled, and the remaining survivors drifted out of the camp. From my immediate family of 8, only Serena and I survived. We never learned what happened to my 16-year-old brother. My father was shot not long after we arrived. All 11 of my young cousins perished, along with their parents. When I saw children after the war, I stopped and stared. I had not seen children in almost a year and a half. Children were condemned to death in the world I had just come from. It is still very painful to talk about what happened, but it is unthinkable that it should not be told. And that as the years are passing, I find it even more urgent to tell. When I speak about the Holocaust, I am again a 13-year-old girl who is certain that no one knew what just happened and that this place existed, that there was such a place that trains delivered thousands of Jewish families each day for one purpose only, to be killed. We were considered subhuman to the Nazis, and they disassociated themselves from our common humanity. The Nazi propaganda taught that Jews must be prevented from contaminating their superior Nazi race. It is difficult to explain the terror of being treated as though you are not part of the human race. It was because of this belief that they were able to kill our babies and children without any problem. I was certain that if I survived and told what happened, it would put an end to prejudice and hatred, but as we know, that did not happen. My hope is that with increased awareness of this tragic history and personal testimony, we will be able to recognize and resist the forces of hate, prejudice, and division that exists in our time. I know that you have some questions, so I'm happy to try to answer some of them. Thank you for listening.
Several of the children wanted to know if you remembered experiencing anti-Semitism while you were growing up.
Well, we lived in a small town, a farming town. My father was born there. My grandfather came there years ago. Everybody knew us, and we were not experiencing anti-Semitism in our town. We went to school with the other children, and things were nice, until, of course, it wasn't later on when Hungary became an ally of Germany, and then they also made laws against the Jews and took away our citizenship.
So would you say that was when you first saw the signs of the Holocaust before it began, or how would societies be aware before such genocides begin to try and get ahead of that?
Well, when Germany became an ally of Hungary, they accepted the same kind of Nuremberg laws as the Jews in Hungary. And so we were then beginning to feel the whole weight of discrimination. You know, businesses were confiscated, Jewish children were thrown out of school. Eventually we had to wear a yellow star on our clothes, and in general the law no longer protected us. And so things became very difficult, very fast.
And what were your relationships with other people in the camps like? What were your daily routines?
Our relationship became strained because the people were worried about, being friends and mixing with us, because this is what happens when a certain group is pointed out as more or less untouchable. People are worried to be seen mixing, because then they become part, friends, and they're investigated to see why they're still liking this shunned group. So that was a quick separation. Yes.
What was the hardest or the scariest moment for you?
Well, it's very scary when the law doesn't protect you, where it is sad to say that in every town, the anti-Jewish, there were always people who wanted to, pick up on this anti-Jewish attitude. And so there would be young guys roaming around, pulling out Jewish fathers, grandfathers from the home, humiliating them, and if our own children, our teenagers, they would be accosted and taunted, and the police would stand by and watch. So, not being protected by the law is a very scary feeling, and that other people have the right to do whatever they want. So as the scariest part, there were many, but I myself experienced one that was really frightening. I think I was about 12 years old. My father and I were on a train, taking the train from one small town to the other, and there were a bunch of teenagers in the car, in the train, and they recognized my father as being Jewish by the way he was dressed or whatever. And they got up and came up to him and began to taunt him and began to have fun with him, because that was okay. And so they were telling each other, what do you think we should do with him? Do you think it would be nice or it would be fun to throw him off the train? And they were laughing and carrying on. And no one in the train, none of the other passengers said anything or got up and called them off. Nobody said a thing. And I was left alone because I was a little girl who either they knew I was part of his group or not, but I was absolutely terrified. I was looking out the window, the fast-moving train, and what will happen with me? Am I continuing? What's going to happen to my father?